The key scraped in the lock, a sound usually meaning relief, but this time a death knell. Mark walked through the door, not with his briefcase but a duffel bag, eyes cold. "I'm leaving, Sarah," he said flatly. "Don't even try to manage anything, you'd be lost." The words were a blow, stripping away my husband, and every shred of self-reliance he'd convinced me I lacked. My breath hitched. How could he just walk away? As I recount the devastating aftermath, like and subscribe to hear how my world shattered and rebuilt. He turned, hand on the doorknob, gone. The door clicked shut, a finality that echoed. It wasn't just him leaving. It was the entire world he'd built around me crumbling into dust. For 15 years, Mark had been my protector, my provider, my everything, or so he'd skillfully led me to believe. He'd handled all the finances, every bill, every investment, every single penny. My role was simple: receive my weekly allowance, a small sum that barely covered groceries and my occasional coffee shop visit, and trust him implicitly. "You're just not good with numbers, Sarah," he'd say, a gentle, patronizing smile on his face. "I'm just protecting us." I believed him. I always had. My parents, God rest their souls, had passed away when I was young. A car accident that had ripped my world apart long before Mark entered it. They'd been successful. I knew that much. My father, a quiet, brilliant man, had built a small but respected engineering firm from the ground up. My mother, an artist, had managed their investments with a surprising acumen, often discussing future plans. "For our legacy," she'd sometimes say. But after their death, everything had been handled by a series of lawyers and trustees I barely knew. Mark had taken over that responsibility too, assuring me he'd simplified things, consolidated accounts, and that a modest inheritance was being managed wisely. Modest, that was the word he always used. Modest, but enough to keep me comfortable, he'd promised. And I was comfortable, in a gilded cage of ignorance. The first hint of the true disaster came a day later, when I tried to buy groceries. My debit card was declined. Embarrassment burned my cheeks as the cashier looked at me with pity. "Insufficient funds, ma'am?" I tried again, my hand shaking. Same result. I called the bank, my voice trembling. The automated message informed me my account was closed. Closed? That made no sense. Mark had always kept a joint account for household expenses. Panic began to claw at my throat. I rushed home, my mind racing through possibilities. A mistake? A system error? No. This felt colder, more deliberate. I checked the mail. Nothing. No letters from the bank, no warnings. I tried to log into our online banking. My credentials didn't work. His did, of course. He'd changed everything. Every password, every login, every access point. He hadn't just left. He'd systematically wiped me from our shared financial existence. My phone, a relic of a simpler time, hummed with a low battery. I plugged it in, my fingers fumbling. Mark always insisted on handling the phone bills too, claiming I'd overused data. Another tiny thread of control I hadn't even noticed until it was gone. I sat on the cold kitchen floor, surrounded by the remnants of a life that was no longer mine. The house felt too big, too empty, too silent. How was I going to pay for anything? Groceries? The mortgage? Utilities? My mind, trained by years of Mark's subtle gaslighting, immediately went to, "I'm useless." He was right. I can't manage anything. A wave of nausea washed over me. I needed to call someone, anyone. But who? My friends were Mark's friends, our social circle carefully curated by him. My family, what little was left, lived hundreds of miles away. Distant relatives I barely knew. I was truly alone. Days bled into a blur of frantic, desperate attempts. I called the bank again, trying to explain my situation. They said they couldn't discuss joint accounts without both parties present or without explicit permission. They couldn't give me access to an account Mark had closed. It was a brick wall. Every conversation ending with a polite but firm, "I'm sorry, ma'am, there's nothing we can do." I went to a pawn shop, selling the few pieces of jewelry I owned that weren't gifts from Mark, just to buy food. The shame was a bitter taste in my mouth. My parents' faces flashed in my mind. They had worked so hard. They had built something. Surely they wouldn't have left me completely unprovided for. Mark had always been vague about the exact details of their estate, often saying, "It's all tied up in long-term trusts, darling. Nothing we can touch for years. But it's safe. Safe. The word mocked me now. One afternoon, as despair threatened to consume me whole, my old landline, a relic Mark insisted we keep for emergencies, rang. I rarely used it. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something, a desperate flicker of hope, made me pick up. "Hello?" My voice was a shaky whisper. A formal, slightly clipped voice responded, "Is this Sarah Jenkins, formerly Sarah Peterson?" My maiden name. It had been years since anyone had used it. "Yes, this is Sarah. My name is Arthur Davies. I'm Mark Jenkins's accountant. Or, I was. I need to speak with you urgently regarding your deceased parents' estate. There are some irregularities. Can you meet me tomorrow morning?" The line crackled, then went silent. My blood ran cold. Mark's accountant? Parents' estate? Irregularities? The words hung in the air, a terrifying, tantalizing promise of a truth I was utterly unprepared to face. My hand, still clutching the receiver, trembled so violently I thought I might drop it. What could Mark's accountant possibly want with me? And why now, after all these years of silence about my parents' supposed modest legacy? My stomach churned, a knot of fear and a sliver of desperate hope intertwining. This call felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into an abyss I couldn't yet comprehend. The phone call from Mr. Davies, Mark's accountant, had felt like a cruel joke, a final twist of the knife in the wound Mark had left gaping. "Irregularities," he'd said, his voice clipped and formal, "concerning your parents' estate." Parents' estate. My parents, bless their quiet, unassuming souls, had left me little more than a box of photo albums and a profound sense of loss. Mark had always handled everything, of course. They weren't wealthy, Sarah, he'd often dismissed, a casual wave of his hand sweeping away any lingering questions I might have had about the modest life they'd led after their small business folded. Yet the desperation clawing at my gut was a far more powerful motivator than skepticism. I had nothing, no money, no home, no husband, and nowhere to turn. So I agreed to meet him the following morning. Mr. Davies' office was in a sleek, anonymous building downtown, a stark contrast to the faded, peeling paint of my own life. He was a small, precise man, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to take in every detail. He didn't offer me coffee, only a glass of water that trembled slightly in my hand. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Miller," he began, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone who dealt with numbers all day. "I know this is an incredibly difficult time for you." I just nodded, clutching the water glass. "I'm afraid what I have to tell you will make it even more so, but it's imperative you know." He paused, adjusting a folder on his desk. "Your parents, Eleanor and Richard Hayes, were not, as you may have been led to believe, of modest means." My breath hitched. He continued, his gaze unwavering. "They were, in fact, exceptionally astute investors. Following the sale of their tech startup in the late 90s, they established a substantial trust fund for you, a multi-million-dollar trust fund, Mrs. Miller." The words hung in the air, heavy and absurd. Multi-million-dollar? My parents? The image of my mother carefully budgeting for groceries, my father patching his old work trousers, flashed before my eyes. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "That's impossible." Mark said. Mr. Davies' lips thinned. Mark was well aware of its existence. He was, in fact, the sole trustee appointed by your parents, with specific instructions for its management and disbursement upon your 30th birthday, and full access to you at 35. He pushed a stack of documents across the desk. "These are copies of the trust deed, bank statements, and investment portfolios dating back 20 years. Your parents were incredibly careful, Mrs. Miller. They wanted to ensure your financial security for life." My eyes scanned the documents, blurry with disbelief. Dates, figures, bank names I recognized only from news headlines. They all pointed to an undeniable truth. A trust fund, for me, and Mark, my husband, the man who had controlled every penny of my life, who had given me a paltry allowance and lectured me on my supposed inability to manage money, had known. He had known all along. A cold, nauseating wave of betrayal washed over me, so potent it made my vision swim. He took it? The words were a strangled gasp. Mr. Davies nodded slowly. He didn't just take it, Mrs. Miller. He systematically siphoned it away. Over the years, he transferred funds to shell corporations, invested in high-risk ventures under false names, and spent exorbitant amounts on personal luxuries, none of which, I suspect, you were aware of. He pointed to a line of transactions. He exploited every loophole, every clause. He used his position as trustee to essentially plunder your inheritance, leaving just enough to maintain the illusion of a struggling but comfortable life for the two of you, while he lived off your fortune. The air felt thin, suffocating. The man I had loved, trusted, built a life with, was a thief, a calculating, cold-blooded thief who had systematically stripped me of my past, my present, and nearly my future. The years of financial control, the casual dismissals of my intelligence, the gaslighting about my inability to handle money, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. It wasn't about protecting me. It was about keeping me utterly dependent, utterly blind. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms. The anger, hot and sharp, began to cut through the paralyzing shock. What can I do? My voice was hoarse, unfamiliar. Mr. Davies leaned forward, his expression grave. This is not a simple case, Mrs. Miller. Mark is a very clever man. He meticulously covered his tracks. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar fraud, a breach of fiduciary duty, and potentially criminal charges. Reclaiming your funds will require a comprehensive legal battle. You'll need an exceptional lawyer. I've already taken the liberty of compiling a preliminary report and a list of highly recommended attorneys who specialize in complex financial fraud cases. He slid another folder across the desk. This will be a long, arduous fight. Mark will deny everything. He will fight dirty. He has vast resources and he's not above using them to manipulate perception, even public opinion. My gaze fell on the thick folder, its weight feeling like a new burden. A battle against Mark, the man who had been my entire world, now revealed as my greatest enemy. The thought was terrifying, but beneath the fear, a tiny ember of something else began to glow. Defiance. I wouldn't let him get away with this. Not after everything. He's a master manipulator, Mr. Davies said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He's always been one step ahead. Even when your parents tried to put safeguards in place, he found ways around them. For example, your parents stipulated that upon your 35th birthday, the trusteeship would transfer fully to you, provided you undergo a financial literacy assessment. Mark, however, managed to secure an amendment, a highly sophisticated legal maneuver, claiming you were incapable due to, well, he fabricated a history of financial mismanagement and dependency. It was meticulously documented. Seemingly innocuous, but it effectively locked you out. Legally. He paused, his eyes narrowing. He truly thought he had you trapped. He didn't leave because he ran out of money. He left because he believed he'd finally bled the trust dry and could simply disappear, leaving you to flounder, having convinced you that you were utterly useless without him. He picked up a pen, tapping it against the desk. This isn't just about money, Mrs. Miller. This is about power. And Mark Miller, I assure you, will do anything to keep it. Anything. The word echoed in the quiet office, a chilling promise of the war to come. The words, financially incapable, echoed in the sterile office, a cruel, final twist of the knife. Mark hadn't just stolen my inheritance. He'd tried to steal my very identity, my right to exist as an autonomous adult. My hands clenched in my lap, nails digging into my palms. Mr. Davies watched me with a weary sympathy that made my skin crawl. He saw the broken woman Mark had tried to make me, but something inside me, a tiny ember I hadn't known still glowed, flickered into a defiant flame. What do I do? My voice was thin, but steady. Mr. Davies nodded, as if expecting the question. I've already taken the liberty of contacting a colleague, Eleanor Vance. She's a formidable attorney, specializing in financial fraud and complex marital asset disputes. She's reviewed the preliminary documents I sent her this morning. She's expecting your call. He pushed a business card across the polished desk. I clutched the card, the edges digging into my palm. The walk to Eleanor's office felt like traversing a battlefield. Every step was heavy, laden with the weight of years of deception and the dawning, horrifying realization of just how thoroughly I had been played. Her office was modern, minimalist, bathed in a cool, confident light. Eleanor Vance herself was sharp, impeccably dressed, with eyes that missed nothing. She listened, leaning forward, her expression unreadable as I recounted the story, my voice trembling only slightly when I spoke Mark's name. "It's a textbook case of financial abuse and fraud, Ms. Hayes," she stated, her voice calm, devoid of judgment, but a highly sophisticated one. "Mark didn't just hide your trust, he systematically dismantled your financial identity. The Declaration of Financial Incapability he filed was a master stroke of malice designed to legally disempower you. Should you ever discover the truth, it makes reclaiming what's yours significantly more complicated, but not impossible." "Complicated how?" I asked, my throat tight. "He's built layers of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and manipulated investment vehicles. It will take time, resources, and a meticulous forensic investigation to unravel. He's also likely anticipated this. Mark is not an amateur, Ms. Hayes. He's a predator. He's been planning this for years, possibly even before your parents passed." The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Years. He'd been planning to steal from me, to control me, even before my parents were gone. It was a betrayal so deep it felt like a physical wound. Eleanor laid out the initial steps: cease and desist letters, freezing accessible assets, and a preliminary injunction. She spoke of discovery, depositions, and the likelihood of a protracted legal battle. I felt a surge of fear, a familiar tightening in my chest. This was so much bigger than just me. It was a fight against a ghost, a shadow that had manipulated my entire adult life. "I need to understand my parents' intent," I said, a sudden clarity washing over me. "Why did they set up a trust like this? What were they thinking?" Eleanor nodded. "That's crucial. Their will, the trust documents themselves, any letters of intent, they'll all be vital. Do you have any of their personal effects? Old papers? Journals?" I thought of the boxes tucked away in the back of my old closet, the ones Mark had always dismissed as junk from my sentimental phase. I'd never had the time or the energy to sort through them. Now they felt like a lifeline. Back in my tiny temporary apartment, I pulled out a dusty box labeled Mom and Dad, MISC. Inside were photo albums, dried flowers, and a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. My mother's elegant script filled the pages, mostly mundane updates, but then I found it. A letter dated just months before their fatal accident. It was addressed to me, unopened. "My dearest Sarah," it began. "Your father and I have been discussing your future, as parents are wont to do. We worry, my love. You have such a trusting heart, and the world can be a cruel place. We want to ensure your security, always, no matter what life throws at you. The trust we've established is for your independence, your freedom. It's a safety net, a springboard, a testament to our belief in you. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not capable, not enough. You are more than enough. And this, our gift, is to ensure you never have to depend on anyone else for your worth or your survival." My vision blurred. Tears streamed down my face, hot and stinging. They had known. They had tried to protect me, and Mark had desecrated their last loving act. The anger that had been simmering finally boiled over, pure and scalding. This wasn't just about money. It was about their memory, their legacy, their desperate attempt to shield me from the very man who had stolen their gift. The next morning, Eleanor filed the injunction. Within hours, the first volley from Mark arrived. Not a legal document, but a text message, sent to my old, now deactivated number, then forwarded to my new one. It was short, chillingly familiar. "Heard you're making waves. Be careful, Sarah. You're out of your depth. You always were." Then came the emails. Not directly from him, but from anonymous accounts, linking to old social media posts of mine, taken out of context. A photo of me at a charity gala, laughing, captioned, "The helpless wife? Some people are just greedy." Another, a screenshot of a minor car accident I'd had years ago. "Prone to accidents, aren't we, Sarah? Some things never change." It was a subtle, insidious smear campaign designed to paint me as unstable, grasping, and unreliable. He was weaponizing my past, my vulnerabilities. Fear was a cold knot in my stomach. He was watching. He knew my new number. He knew my every move. The public shaming, even on a small scale, was designed to isolate me, to make me doubt myself. He had spent years chipping away at my confidence, and now he was trying to finish the job. But reading my mother's letter, feeling her love reach across the grave, had changed something. The old Sarah, the one who would cower, who would believe his lies, was fading. A new one, fueled by a righteous fury, was emerging. "He's trying to provoke you," Eleanor warned, her voice calm over the phone. "Don't engage, don't respond. We expected this. It's typical abuser tactics. He wants to control the narrative to make you appear irrational." I listened, but my mind was churning. He was desperate. He was cornered. And desperate men did desperate things. The subtle threats, the veiled accusations, they were just the beginning. I knew Mark. He wouldn't stop there. He would use every dirty trick, every manipulation. I felt an unsettling certainty. This wasn't just about money or reputation to him. It was about power. And losing that power would drive him to extremes I hadn't yet imagined. As I ended the call, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. Just a single word, followed by a blurry image. The word was watch. The image was of my apartment building, taken from across the street. My breath hitched. He wasn't just watching, he was sending a message, and that message felt like a warning that went far beyond mere legal maneuvering. The blinds were drawn, but I still felt eyes on me. The detective's words echoed in my ears. "He's sending a message, Mrs. Hayes. He wants you to know he's watching." My hands trembled as I made coffee, the mundane act a stark contrast to the churning anxiety in my gut. Mark wasn't just fighting me in court, he was invading my space, my peace. It was a calculated move, designed to isolate and break me, just as he had done for years with his financial stranglehold. But something was different now. The fear was still there, a cold knot, but beneath it, a tiny spark of something else flickered. Defiance. I wouldn't let him win. Not again. My lawyer, Miss Albright, arrived an hour later, her sharp eyes scanning the street before she even stepped inside. "We need to escalate our investigation into his past," she stated, her voice calm but firm. "This isn't just about your trust fund, Sarah. This is a pattern." She had already filed a restraining order, but we both knew it was a piece of paper against a man who believed himself untouchable. Our team began digging, not just into Mark's recent activities, but into his entire financial history. They unearthed a trail of smaller, almost imperceptible deceptions. Shell companies dissolved before they could be fully audited, investments that mysteriously vanished, even a previous marriage that ended in a messy, quiet divorce, with a surprisingly small settlement for his ex-wife, who had apparently signed away her rights quickly and without question. It painted a chilling picture of a man who had perfected the art of subtle larceny, scaling up his ambitions with each successful con. My trust fund, it seemed, was his magnum opus. The more we uncovered, the more I understood the insidious nature of his control. He hadn't just taken my money, he had taken my agency, my belief in my own competence. He'd gaslit me into thinking I was incapable, that I needed him. Now, every discovery felt like a direct blow to that carefully constructed lie. Miss Albright found a clause in my parents' trust document that made my blood run cold. It stipulated that the funds could only be accessed by me upon reaching 30, or in the event of my marriage, provided my spouse signed a prenuptial agreement explicitly waiving any claim to the trust. I had never signed a prenup. Mark had always dismissed the idea, saying it was unnecessary between us. He knew. He had known all along. He had convinced me to bypass the very protection my parents had painstakingly put in place to ensure my financial security. The betrayal felt deeper, more personal, knowing he had so deliberately subverted their loving intentions. "Your parents were incredibly shrewd, Sarah," Miss Albright observed, poring over the old faded documents. "They understood the world. They wanted to protect you from exactly this kind of predatory behavior." The words hit me hard. My parents, who I had always remembered as loving but somewhat naive, had possessed a foresight I never attributed to them. I longed for more insight into their decision-making. That's when I remembered Aunt Clara. She wasn't a blood relative, but my mother's oldest, dearest friend, almost like an aunt. I hadn't seen her in years, not since Mark had subtly, then overtly, discouraged my contact with anyone outside his orbit. He'd always said Clara was too gossipy, too dramatic, a bad influence. In retrospect, I saw it for what it was, isolating me from anyone who might have seen through his facade. I found her number in an old address book, tucked away in a dusty box of forgotten keepsakes. My fingers trembled as I dialed. "Clara? It's Sarah." Her voice, surprisingly strong, carried a warmth I hadn't realized I missed. We met for lunch in a quiet cafe, a world away from the legal battles and surveillance. Clara, with her kind eyes and sharp wit, listened patiently as I recounted everything. She didn't interrupt, just nodded, her gaze full of understanding. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Your mother," she began, her voice softening. She had a premonition, not about Mark specifically, but about the kind of man who would be drawn to wealth. She told me she wanted to ensure you had a safety net, a foundation of freedom, she called it. She was so worried about you being taken advantage of, being too trusting. Clara then shared stories of my parents' early struggles, their determination to build something enduring, and their fierce protectiveness over me, their only child. She mentioned how meticulously they had worked with their estate lawyer, a formidable woman named Evelyn Thorne, to draft the trust. Evelyn was no fool, Clara said. She made sure that trust was ironclad. She even put in a clause about financial oversight, a kind of check-in that was supposed to happen every 5 years, or upon any major life event like marriage. My heart plummeted. Mark had made sure that never happened. He had severed all ties with my parents' legal team, claiming they were old-fashioned and overpriced immediately after their deaths. It was all so calculated. The emotional weight of it all was crushing. The betrayal wasn't just Mark's, it was the years of my own ignorance, my blind trust, the way I had willingly handed over my power. There were nights I would just sit in the dark, the enormity of his deception suffocating me. He hadn't just stolen money, he had stolen years of my life, years I could have been building something real, years I could have been truly free. The fear of Mark was still present, but now it mingled with a burning rage, a desire for justice that superseded my terror. As our investigation intensified, Ms. Albright's team uncovered a significant offshore account, registered under a complex web of shell corporations in a tax haven notorious for its secrecy. It contained not just a portion of my trust, but millions more, clearly funds Mark had siphoned from other sources, other victims. It was a vast, sprawling financial web. "This is it, Sarah," Ms. Albright said, her voice grim. "This is the real jackpot. But it's not just your money, and the people involved in helping him move this kind of money. They're not small-time players. This goes far beyond simple marital fraud." She showed me documents detailing transactions with a shadowy holding company. The name on the paperwork was familiar, but not from Mark's world. It was a name linked to a powerful, influential family with deep connections to organized crime, a family I had only ever read about in hushed whispers in the tabloids. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about reclaiming my inheritance anymore. It was about stepping into a much darker, far more dangerous game. The news that Mark's fraud extended beyond my trust fund, reaching into the shadowy depths of organized crime, sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Mr. Davies' face, usually so composed, was etched with a grim urgency. "This isn't just about your money anymore, Sarah," he'd warned, his voice barely a whisper. "This is dangerous." My lawyer, Ms. Albright, immediately beefed up my security, advising me to change my routines, to be constantly aware of my surroundings. The fear was a cold, constant companion, but beneath it, a strange resolve began to harden. Mark wasn't just a controlling husband. He was a predator operating on a scale I couldn't have conceived, and I was now standing in his crosshairs. Then the media storm hit. It started with a local article, a small mention of allegations of significant marital fraud. Within days, it exploded. The sheer scale of the stolen millions, the revelation of a hidden trust fund, and the hint of connections to illicit activities captivated the public. My face, once anonymous, was plastered across news channels and tabloids. Reporters camped outside my lawyer's office, shouting questions I couldn't answer. My modest rental apartment, once my sanctuary, felt exposed, vulnerable. Social media, a beast I rarely engaged with, churned with speculation, sympathy, and venom. I was alternately painted as a naive victim, a cunning gold digger, or an attention seeker. Every step I took felt like walking through a minefield of lenses and microphones. The privacy I had always cherished, even under Mark's suffocating control, was utterly obliterated. I found myself flinching at every sudden noise, jumping at my phone's incessant ringing. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were a kaleidoscope of Mark's sneering face and flashing cameras. Mark, meanwhile, spiraled into a desperate frenzy. Cornered and exposed, he launched a brutal counteroffensive. His PR team, a squadron of highly paid sharks, started leaking stories to discredit me. I was painted as unstable, prone to delusions, a woman who squandered money and fabricated elaborate fantasies to extort her generous ex-husband. They dug up every vulnerability, every past insecurity, twisting them into weapons. Old acquaintances were contacted, their words manipulated into damning sound bites. He even hired private investigators who shadowed my every move, their presence a constant, chilling reminder that I was being watched. One evening, a grainy photo of me leaving a grocery store, looking tired and disheveled, appeared on a gossip site with a caption mocking my newfound poverty. The cruelty was astounding, yet it only fueled my resolve. This wasn't just about money, it was about my reputation, my sanity, my very identity. Miss Albright, seeing my struggle, suggested a strategic move. "It's time, Sarah, to tell your story, on your terms." The idea terrified me. My instinct was to retreat, to hide from the public eye. But I remembered the woman who called me a gold digger on the street, the dismissive snorts on online forums. I couldn't let Mark control the narrative anymore. We chose a respected investigative journalist known for her integrity. The interview was grueling. I sat across from her, my hands clasped tightly, my voice trembling at first. But as I spoke, the words flowed, raw and unfiltered. I talked about the allowance, the isolation, the insidious control, the constant gaslighting that had eroded my self-worth. I spoke about my parents, their love, and the profound betrayal of Mark stealing their legacy. I didn't cry for sympathy. I spoke with a quiet, burning indignation. It wasn't easy, reliving years of pain, exposing my deepest wounds, but with each sentence a fragile sense of empowerment took root. The journalist listened, her gaze unwavering. When the piece aired, the public reaction shifted dramatically. The narrative began to turn. People saw not a caricature, but a woman who had survived, who was fighting back. Messages of support flooded in, strangers sharing their own stories of financial abuse, creating a powerful, unexpected community around me. The interview also had an unforeseen consequence. A few days later, Miss Albright received an anonymous email. It contained a single, cryptic sentence. "Ask about the Cayman account and the Rosebud operation." Attached was a heavily encrypted file. Mr. Davies, with his unparalleled forensic accounting skills, spent days decrypting it. When he finally succeeded, the contents made my blood run cold. It wasn't just about my trust fund, or even other victims Mark had defrauded. This file detailed an intricate web of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and large-scale money laundering operations. The Rosebud operation was a code name for a massive illicit funding scheme, directly linked to the organized crime family we'd only vaguely suspected. Mark wasn't just doing business with them, he was a central figure, a financial architect for their illegal empire. The file contained names, dates, amounts, evidence that could bring down an entire syndicate. But the most terrifying discovery was not the scale of the operation, but a single, recent transaction record. A large sum of money transferred out of one of the Rosebud accounts directly into an account under my maiden name opened just weeks before Mark left me. It was a setup, a cruel, elaborate trap designed to implicate me, to make me the fall guy if anything went wrong. My name, undeniably, was on it. The very day after we found it, a chillingly precise message arrived, not to my phone, but to a burner phone Miss Albright had given me for emergencies. "We know what you found. Drop it, or your newfound freedom will be very, very short-lived." The voice on the recording was distorted, but the menace was chillingly clear. I clutched the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. They knew. They were watching, and I was holding the key to their entire operation. The cold dread from the syndicate's threat, the chilling message echoing in my mind, should have paralyzed me. It didn't. Instead, it sharpened my focus, a desperate clarity. The courtroom on the morning of the final hearing was a blur of polished wood and hushed whispers, but my gaze was fixed on Mark. He sat across the aisle, his face a mask of practiced calm, a faint, condescending smirk playing on his lips. He still believed he was untouchable. Mr. Davies, his usual meticulous self, was a comforting presence beside my formidable lawyer, Miss Albright. Her calm demeanor belied the fierce intelligence in her eyes. "Today, Sarah," she'd said just moments before, "we lay it all bare." The prosecution began, detailing the intricate web of Mark's deceit, the shell corporations, the falsified documents, the systematic siphoning of my parents' trust. Each revelation was a fresh wound, but also a vindication. The numbers flashed on screens, damning and irrefutable. My parents' foresight, their careful planning to secure my future, had been systematically dismantled by the man I had trusted with my life. The defense, predictably, tried to paint me as an ungrateful, naive wife, easily manipulated, a woman who simply hadn't understood her own finances. They suggested I was now trying to exploit Mark's generosity due to a sudden thirst for wealth. The implication hung in the air like a foul odor. I gripped the wooden rail of the witness stand, my knuckles white. Then it was my turn. Ms. Albright's voice was gentle. "Miss Miller, please tell the court, in your own words, about your marriage to Mr. Miller." My heart hammered against my ribs. The syndicate's threat still gnawed at the edges of my mind, a dark undercurrent to the formal proceedings. But this was my moment to reclaim my voice, not just the money. I took a deep breath, the scent of old paper and nervous sweat filling my lungs. "For years," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, "I believed I was financially incompetent. Mark told me I was. He controlled every penny, every decision. My allowance was barely enough for groceries. He built a cage around me, invisible bars of dependence and self-doubt. I spoke of the isolation, the quiet erosion of my self-worth. The way he had convinced me that his control was for my own good, a protective shield against my perceived foolishness. I described the shock of his abandonment, the terror of discovering the empty accounts, the crushing realization that I had nothing, not even the ability to buy food. The jury listened, their faces a mixture of sympathy and grim understanding. Mark's smirk had vanished. His jaw was tight. Miss Albright guided me through the discovery of the trust, Mr. Davies' revelation, and the agonizing process of comprehending the scale of Mark's betrayal. "And when you discovered the truth about your parents' trust, Miss Miller, how did that make you feel?" she asked, her voice soft. The truth was a torrent. "Betrayed," I said, my voice thick with emotion, violated, as if he had reached into my past, into my parents' love and desecrated it, but also angry, so deeply, furiously angry, angry at him, yes, but also at myself, for believing him, for being so blind. I met Mark's gaze across the courtroom. His eyes held a flicker of something I hadn't seen before, fear. The cross-examination was brutal. Mark's lawyer, a sharp-faced woman with a predatory gaze, tried to tear apart my credibility, implying I was a gold digger, a liar, that I had always known about the trust, and was now fabricating a story for sympathy. "Isn't it true, Miss Miller," she sneered, "that you enjoyed the lavish lifestyle Mr. Miller provided, the holidays, the expensive gifts, the beautiful home?" "I enjoyed the illusion of security," I countered, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "I enjoyed believing I was loved. The gifts were always contingent on my compliance. The home was a gilded cage." I spoke of the sophisticated fraud, the layers of legal maneuvering Mark had used to keep the trust hidden, even from the very lawyers who had set it up, how he had exploited a loophole in the trust's original wording, a clause that gave him temporary control as my financial guardian until I turned 40, a birthday I had yet to reach. He had ensured I never had cause to question it, never had reason to seek independent counsel. Then Ms. Albright produced the decrypted file. The courtroom bristled with anticipation. "Your Honor, members of the jury," she stated, her voice resonating with authority, "we have evidence here, uncovered recently, that demonstrates not only Mr. Miller's systematic financial fraud against my client, but also his involvement in a far more extensive, illicit network. This document," she held it up, a printout of the code-filled pages I had found, "details his central role in a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation and a scheme to implicate Ms. Miller should his activities ever come to light." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Mark's face went ashen. He lunged forward, restrained by his own counsel. "That's a lie!" he roared, his mask finally shattering. "She's trying to frame me." But the evidence was too strong. Mr. Davies, meticulous as ever, had provided supporting documentation, bank records, encrypted communications, all pointing to Mark's deeper, darker connections. The judge, a stern woman with an unyielding gaze, called for order. The jury, their faces grim, exchanged knowing glances. The prosecution rested their case, confident. Mark's defense crumbled. His lawyer, visibly shaken by the new revelations, could offer little resistance. The judge then announced that the jury had reached a verdict. The air in the courtroom grew thick, almost suffocating. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. I looked at Mr. Davies, who offered a small, reassuring nod. Then the foreman stood, his voice clear and unwavering. "We find the defendant, Mark Andrew Miller, guilty on all counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." A collective sigh, a murmur, swept through the room. I felt a dizzying wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled my knees. Mark stood, his face a contorted mask of fury and disbelief. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a hatred so intense it felt physical. "You think this is over, Sarah?" He spat, his voice low, guttural, as the bailiffs moved in. He leaned closer to the bars of the defendant's box, his gaze fixed on mine. "You just opened a door you should have left locked. They'll come for you, and when they do, your precious money won't save you." He was dragged away, still struggling, still ranting, his final words hanging in the air like a poison mist. The warning from the syndicate, the one I had received just days ago, crashed back into my mind with terrifying clarity. He wasn't just talking about himself, he was talking about them, and now I was truly alone, with a fortune I was only just beginning to grasp, and a new, unseen enemy lurking in the shadows. The victory felt hollow, tinged with a fresh, insidious fear. The gavel's final crack echoed through the courtroom, a sound that should have been liberating but instead felt hollow. Mark was found guilty on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, and a litany of other charges that painted a portrait of a man I barely recognized, a stranger who had systematically dismantled my life for profit. He was sentenced to a substantial prison term, his empire of lies crumbling around him. But as they led him away, his eyes, dark and devoid of remorse, locked onto mine. "You think this is over, Sarah?" He'd sneered, his voice a low growl that only I could hear above the murmur of the crowd. "That syndicate doesn't forget. They always collect." The words chilled me to the bone, a venomous whisper of a new enemy, unseen and far more dangerous than the one now behind bars. The immediate aftermath of the verdict was a strange mix of exhaustion and a cautious, unfamiliar sense of lightness. The weight I hadn't known I was carrying for years had finally lifted, yet the air still felt thin. The days that followed were a blur of legalities. Mr. Davies, my steadfast anchor and an unexpected friend, guided me through the labyrinthine process of reclaiming my trust fund. It wasn't a simple transfer. Mark had hidden assets across multiple shell corporations and offshore accounts, weaving a financial tapestry of deceit so intricate it defied belief. It took months of painstaking work by a dedicated team of forensic accountants, but slowly, meticulously, the millions began to trickle back into my rightful possession. The first time I saw the full sum in my own account, a number that dwarfed anything I could have ever conceived, I felt no joy, only a profound, almost dizzying sense of responsibility. This wasn't just money. It was the stolen years, the suppressed dreams, the truth of my parents' profound love and foresight, finally made tangible. It was a stark reminder of their desire for my security, a desire Mark had so cruelly perverted. I moved out of the apartment, a space now tainted by Mark's insidious presence, and found a quiet, sun-filled house on the outskirts of town. It had a small, overgrown garden, a place where I could dig my hands into the earth and feel something real, something growing. The initial silence in the house was deafening at first, the absence of his condescending voice, the constant scrutiny, leaving a strange, aching void I didn't know how to fill. I started therapy, a crucial step in my healing journey, a safe space where I could finally unpack the complex trauma of years of emotional and financial abuse. It was a slow, painful process of peeling back layers, confronting my own past complicity in my silence, and learning to trust my own judgment again after so long. The therapist helped me see that my parents' trust wasn't merely about financial security. It was a testament to their unwavering belief in my inherent worth, a belief Mark had systematically, maliciously tried to erase from my very being. The question of what to do with the vast sum of money loomed large. I considered frivolous, even extravagant purchases, a fleeting fantasy of revenge through luxury, but the idea felt utterly empty, devoid of any real satisfaction. The true gift wasn't the wealth itself, but the freedom it offered, the sheer, boundless potential to create something good. I remembered the countless women, like me, trapped in financially abusive relationships, their voices silenced, their futures stolen, their spirits slowly eroded. That's where my purpose began to crystallize, clear and undeniable. I founded the Sarah's Shield Foundation, an ambitious initiative dedicated to providing comprehensive legal aid, essential financial literacy training, and critical safe housing for survivors of economic abuse. It wasn't about giving handouts. It was about empowering women to reclaim their independence, their dignity, and their futures, just as I had so painstakingly reclaimed mine. Every grant disbursed, every educational workshop held, every life touched, felt like a small, hard-won victory against the insidious darkness Mark had embodied, a tangible act of defiance against his legacy of control. My new days became filled with profound meaning and tireless work. I collaborated closely with legal experts, compassionate social workers, and shrewd financial advisors, building a robust network of support. I started speaking publicly, sharing my story not for notoriety or personal gain, but to shed a harsh, necessary light on a widespread, often hidden epidemic. The first time I stood on a stage, my voice trembling but firm, and saw the sea of empathetic faces, some tear-streaked, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be, serving a purpose far greater than myself. I reconnected with old friends I'd inadvertently isolated myself from during the suffocating years of my marriage, and slowly, cautiously, I began to forge new, authentic relationships built on mutual respect, genuine understanding, and shared values. The chilling fear of Mark's mysterious syndicate never fully vanished, a faint, persistent shadow at the very edges of my carefully rebuilt new life, a constant, unsettling reminder that the world could be cruel, but it also made me more vigilant, more resilient, and fiercely protective of my newfound freedom. One crisp autumn evening, while meticulously reviewing a new case file for the foundation, a cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. The intricate details of the financial scheme outlined in the victim's testimony were eerily familiar. A complex web of shell companies, meticulously fabricated paper trails, and suspicious offshore transfers. It mirrored Mark's methods with chilling precision. The victim was a woman named Eleanor, her entire inheritance from her late grandmother systematically siphoned away by her seemingly devoted husband, a man with a suspiciously clean record and a history of extensive, opaque overseas business dealings. Mr. Davies, still a highly valued consultant for the foundation, had flagged it with a grim urgency. "The patterns are too similar, Sarah," he'd said over the phone, his voice tight with concern. "It's almost like a blueprint, a signature." My mind raced back to Mark's parting threat, his chilling, contemptuous mention of a syndicate that always collects. Was this Eleanor's husband a part of it? Was this how they operated? Preying on vulnerable individuals, using the exact same playbook, expanding their reach. A deep, unsettling shiver ran down my spine, a cold premonition that settled deep in my bones. The fight was far from over. In fact, it felt like it had only just truly begun.